And kids, as Sherry has mentioned, we are in a sermon series about fear, and we're using a book by a guy named Adam Hamilton, and it's called Unafraid, Living with Courage and Fear in an Age of Anxiety. We're in our third week. The first week we looked at the Bible's command some 400 times in the Bible. Do not be afraid. 400 times the Bible says that. And then last week, we looked at how sometimes we're afraid of other people, especially people who are different than us. Today, we're going to be looking at our fear of being alone and being unloved. But before we get to our scripture reading, I just want to highlight after worship, grab one of these GPSs. That's a Grow, Pray, Study Guide. There's a daily devotional on this topic of fear, and there's one for everybody. So I invite you to pick one of those up after the service. Bonnie, as our first scripture reading comes from Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 and 18.
The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden, health, sun, and heat. So out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name.
And then it continues, then the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. Our next reading is Psalm 139, verses 5 and then 8 through 10. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there also. If I take the wings of the morning and I settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. Our New Testament reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 34. Jesus is speaking, and he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you should love one another. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, I remember one night in my first year of college when I was driving from Boulder, Colorado, go Buffs, to my mother's home in Denver. And I was feeling particularly lonely that late night, as oftentimes first-year college students will feel. And I became overwhelmed as I looked at the cars racing beside me on the freeway and the other cars coming in the opposite lane. As I watched car after car after car whizzing by at a high speed in the darkness, I pondered where they all had come from and where they all were going, and I wondered, is anybody at the end of the journey for them waiting? So many headlights racing against the inescapable darkness. So many people. And I was overwhelmed with a feeling of being alone in the world. All the time I kept hearing the words made famous by the Beatles. All the lonely people. Where do they come from? All the lonely people. Where do they all belong? And a word, by the way, for our younger generation. The Beatles were a rock band in the 1960s. Okay? I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. Okay? Getting a little old here. Okay? This morning in this series on fear, we turn to the fear of being lonely and unloved. We all know what it's like to feel alone, even when we're in the middle of a crowd. Sometimes, especially when we're in the middle of a crowd, we feel alone. Loneliness is a feeling of isolation, isn't it? It's a feeling of being disconnected from others, like nobody really notices me, nobody really cares about me. It's that feeling that we don't have any real companions with whom to share our lives. Actress Anne Hathaway said, loneliness is my least favorite thing in life. The thing that I'm most worried about is just being alone without anybody that I can care for. Mother Teresa said something similar. She said, the most terrible poverty in life is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. So true. It was a feeling that she struggled with, by the way, much of her own life. Loneliness has become a major social crisis in the United States and indeed throughout most parts of the world. And according to a 2010 AARP study, by the way, AARP stands for the American Association for Retired People, okay? Just for you guys so that you know. They found that 42.6 million Americans over the ages of 45 suffer from chronic loneliness. 42.6 million Americans feel lonely almost all the time. But loneliness affects all ages, doesn't it? Another recent study showed that young people between the ages of 16 and 24 actually feel more lonely than any other age group. How sad is that? The generation that is the most connected through social media isn't making true connections with other people at all. They're lonely, just like everybody else. And it's not good for us. New research suggests that social isolation and chronic loneliness is the #1 threat, surpassing obesity, in fact, to Americans' health. One study in Great Britain, for instance, said that long-term loneliness has the same impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes a day. That's astounding. Science is clear that we need companionship, and it's clear in the Bible also. In the Genesis story of creation that Bonnie read, for instance, God creates the world and everything that's in it, and at the end of each day, God declares it is good. And the 6th day, after God is done creating the first human being, Adam, the Bible, God says, it is very good. But then, when we come to Genesis chapter 2, we encounter something that God says isn't good at all. God looks at Adam and says, it is not good for the man to be alone. And then the solution, I will make a helper suitable for him. And then, if you know the story, Adam falls asleep, God removes one of his ribs, and he forms Eve, a companion, so that he won't be alone. Now, the point of the story isn't that we should be married, because we all shouldn't be married, but rather that we all need friendship and companionship. We were created to do life together. Now, we all experience times of loneliness when we feel hurt or betrayed, unloved or alone, but sometimes the sense of loneliness lasts so long and is so deep that we are convinced that we will never be loved, that no one could ever be my friend. Maybe it was something in our childhood, perhaps we were neglected or abandoned or even abused, and we've carried that hurt with us all of our lives. And so sometimes in reaction to that hurt, we withdraw, don't we, right? Because that way, other people won't be able to hurt us or abandon us. We remove ourselves from the very thing that we most need, opportunities to connect with other people, and we create this shell around us in order to protect ourselves. And it works. But the problem is, nobody else can get in to that shell. There's no friendship. Fear of being alone drives others of us to become people pleasers, almost the opposite problem, which is another chapter in Hamilton's book. We think in our minds that if we will do everything possible, if we don't do everything possible to please other people, that they might leave us and stop caring for us. And as a result, we'll put up with all sorts of terrible relationships, even abusive relationships, because we're just terrified of being alone. But God has a better plan and a better way for us to deal with our fear of being alone, thankfully. In the Gospels, for instance, we find a story where 4 people come alongside a person in pain, and they bring their friend to Jesus to be healed. Mark tells us that the man is paralyzed, but he doesn't tell us what form of paralysis. Is it emotional? Is it spiritual? Is it physical? We don't really know. All we know is that he is hurting and that he can't solve this himself. And so these 4 people, these 4 good friends, come alongside this man and they put him on a stretcher. They become his stretcher bearers. They carry him to the house, and when they arrive, there's so many people there that they can't get him before Jesus. And yet they're determined to help their friend, and so they climb up on top of the roof, and get this, they dig a hole in the roof. Can you imagine this scene, right? They dig a hole in the middle of church, okay? And they drop their friend right down in front of Jesus. And Jesus looks up through the hole in the roof. I can just picture it, can't you? He looks up at the hole in the roof at these 4 stretcher bearers, recognizing their love for their friend that is now before them. And he sees their compassion, and he sees their faith, and he heals the man. It is by the faith of these 4 friends that the paralytic is able to get up and to walk again. You see, friends, the first response to the loneliness that we experience is to have stretcher bearers in our life, isn't it? It's to have friends who will come alongside of us and help us when life gets tough. And that's part of the reason that the church exists. The church is a community of people who are trying to love one another and help one another become whole. In John chapter 13, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, so you are to love one another." Have you ever been loved, really loved by the community of Christ or another community? Have you ever put yourself in a position where you might be loved by the church? This week, a gentleman by the name of Dan Larson came to our office and dropped off some money from his wife for his wife's memorial fund. For first-time guests and for those new to St. Paul, Don's wife, Donna, passed away recently after a long battle with brain cancer. It was pretty rough. Now, Dan himself has never really been super active in our church. And he doesn't exactly wear his sleeves, his emotions on his sleeves, but he was tearing up in our office as he was thinking about all of the ways that people from this congregation have reached out to him and to his family during this terrible time in their lives. He was thinking about all of the people who visited his wife Donna during her battle with cancer, about the deacons that dropped by just to visit her to bring her home communion, about the handmade care bear that our Hope Stream Cancer Ministry brought to her. He was thinking about the people who brought so many casseroles that within 2 or 3 days they had to start freezing all of them. They couldn't eat them all. He was thinking about the people in the kitchen who cooked a meal for over 100 people for Donna's service, and about the scores and scores of hugs and kind words that he has received since his wife's passing, many from people that he hardly knows at all. And these tears came from a man who wasn't really involved in the church and really isn't quite so sure about God. Now, of course, church isn't a perfect place. And by the way, if you ever find a perfect church, don't join it because you're going to ruin it, okay? But I would invite you to name another social institution that consistently does a better job of loving people than the church. And quite honestly, I can't think of anything that over time has done a better job of loving people in the world. So here's a plug for you to consider church involvement if you're not involved in a church. Okay? And perhaps over time, after you get involved in a church, maybe you might want to consider not just being there in worship, but also being there in service as a fully committed member of the church even. I know that gets people a little nervous, but I'm suggesting that you might want to ponder that. And here's why. To commit to church membership is to commit to loving other people and to be loved by other people through thick and thin. And we all need to make commitments like that in our lives. It's to commit to being a part of a community, not just to be an observer from the edge of the community, but rather as a participant from within the community. Yes, the church does need members, that is true, but more importantly, people need the love that flows when people make a commitment like that. But there's another answer to our fear of being alone, and that is God. You come to church, you think at some point, sooner or later, we're going to say something about God, right? We were created, every one of us, to be in relationship with the God of the universe, the creator of everything that is. We were created in that way. Psalm 139 says, "You've searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit down. You know when I stand up. You perceive my thoughts from afar. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the highest heaven, behold, thou art there. If I were to go into the depths of the earth, behold, thou art there also." There's nowhere we can go where God isn't. If we're in a relationship with God, we are never truly alone. Jesus will never leave us nor forsake us, even when other people will. Psalm 27:10 says, "Even if my father or my mother should desert me, the Lord will take care of me." The psalmist is saying that human beings, even family, are imperfect. And they may fail us. In fact, they probably will. There's going to be experiences in our lives where somebody else can't be there with us. But God, the Lord, will always be there with us, no matter what. Yesterday, my wife Rebecca and I drove down to Kansas City to visit with Rebecca's cousin Trish, who has an ALS. Now, for those of you unaware, ALS, also called Lou Gehrig's disease, is an absolutely terrible illness where basically system after system in your body shuts down. You are still there, though. Your brain is still active. You're aware of what's going on around you. But in the end, you can't talk or communicate in any way with the people around you. You're surrounded by people, but cut off from communication. That's got to be an especially fearful type of loneliness, I would think, wouldn't you? And then you die. That's ALS. It's terrible. Now, thankfully, Trish is a strong believer in Jesus, but it is still an unbearably hard experience to go through. And we went down yesterday basically for Rebecca to say goodbye to her cousin. Well, Monday was the 1-year anniversary of her diagnosis with ALS. And as you can imagine, that was not an anniversary that anybody was eager to celebrate. And yet, this is what she posted on her blog on the internet the next day on Tuesday. She says, "For some reason, the song, 'You'll Never Walk Alone,' from the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Carousel, has been occupying my mind this past week. You know, you've heard it even if you haven't seen the musical. A gazillion artists, Roy Orbison and so forth, have recorded it. The lyrics," she wrote, "go like this. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark." We didn't plan that, by the way. "At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind. Walk on through the rain. Though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. What a witness. And then she closed her blog post this way. She said, as time goes on and more of myself is emptied, more and more of God is revealed. And there is life and peace in that place. There is. I'm experiencing it, she wrote. Maybe not to the extent that I long for today, but in one tiny step at a time. And for that, she said, I am grateful. You know, we are all afraid of being alone. But we're all in this thing called life together, dear friends. And so God gives us the gift of one another in a community called the church, that we might love one another through thick and through thin. But even more than that, God gives us His very self in Jesus Christ, and promises to never leave us nor to forsake us, no matter what our storm or how great our darkness. And for that, we can join with Rebecca's cousin, Trish, and be grateful. Let's pray. Gracious God, you know how afraid we are of being alone and what kind of relational wackiness we will engage in to not be alone. Help us, God, to know that we don't have to be alone. I pray if there's anyone here today who feels alone, that they would tell somebody. That they would talk to a parent, a school counselor, a trusted religious professional, or a family member. That they would say, I feel lonely and I need a friend. We pray that the church, and this church in particular, could be that kind of place where people could come and say, I feel lonely today. Could we talk for a little? I just need a hug. And Lord, there's that void in our heart, and there's something that even other people can't fill. And so we invite you to come and to fill that space and to live in it with us. To remind us that we never truly are alone in our lives. That you always desire to be our friend. That you always desire to walk with us through life, no matter what will come. For that we are grateful. All of God's people say together. We're going to invite you to stand.